All right, everyone, it's time for today's BitChute exclusive talking about the coronavirus lockdowns and how unconstitutional they are, because at this point they clearly are. Now, I say this first and foremost. I was in favor, as I think most reasonable people were, of lockdowns initially. For the first month or so that this virus began spreading outside of China, it made sense to close down trade and travel, to try to keep things isolated, because we needed to take a moment to step back and look at the situation and do testing to find out what the death rate was, what the transmissibility of the disease was, how easy does it infect via surface, how is it fully airborne, droplet spread, or neither. We had too many unknowns, and we didn't have any clue how to take care of it. We didn't have any effective treatments. Now we've got all sorts of experimental treatments. There's what is it called? Remdesivir, I believe it's called. Azithromycin, hydroxychloroquine, quinine treatments experimentally, survivor's blood serum, interferon, all of these different things, zinc supplements being used alone or in combination. We've got progress towards a vaccine that I personally don't think is likely to ever be developed. And it's funny, there was an Oxford piece the other day saying there was only a 50-50 chance that the vaccine, the companies trying to make vaccine would actually deploy it fully, because it looks like the number of new cases eventually won't even justify bothering to make one. That's great news, by the way. Of course, take that with a grain of salt considering the source. That being said, at this point, lockdowns we know don't work, number one. We can objectively say that they don't, because we can look at the differential in the number of cases and deaths between states and nations that locked down and those that didn't. There's no significant correlation. Locking things down doesn't reduce the spread, and it certainly doesn't reduce the death toll. That's bad, because it means that basically things are out of our hands, but it's good in the sense that we don't need to cause a depression, because literally won't do anything. The only effective method to limiting the transmission of this disease is to tell people, wash your fucking hands, wear a mask if appropriate, don't go out if it's unnecessary, like in a frivolous manner. Going to the beach, not high risk, but maybe you shouldn't be going to the mosh pit, and things like that. You educate people. And people, by the way, they should be washing their hands already. They should already try not to cough and sneeze on each other. Even during a normal flu season, it's just retarded for people to act in that manner. So here's the thing, though. The problem is that if the lockdowns don't do anything and threaten the economy, there's no pragmatic argument to maintain them. At this point, only authoritarians and paranoid people, but people who are stricken with fear, dumbasses, basically want lockdowns. Normal people don't want them anymore. The constitutional issue, specifically for the U.S., also comes into play, because this violates the Constitution on multiple levels. The first thing it violates is the First Amendment, and also the Fourth, I would argue. The First Amendment's violated on multiple counts. They're trying to close down places like churches and synagogues. That's blatantly unlawful. The idea that you can close a tax-exempt place of worship explicitly protected under the First Amendment for an indefinite period of time is totally ludicrous. No such power exists in the Constitution. I'm scratching my head as to how the governors of these states can possibly justify continuing to keep them locked down, again, for a short, definite period of time in the face of a pandemic that could kill large swaths of your population. It maybe makes pragmatic sense. Even then, it may not be specifically constitutional. I like Dershowitz there rambling about how a compelled vaccine is totally lawful. Debatable. Just because Alan Dershowitz says it doesn't mean that it's actually true. It doesn't matter if he has a law degree. There are plenty of people with law degrees, I think, that would beg to differ. The law is a whore, basically, anyway. Number two, essentially, I would argue at this point, that the coronavirus response violates the First Amendment right to free speech, let alone just assembly and worship. Speech in the sense that you have tech firms that are taking taxpayer money, that in many cases don't pay taxes in and of themselves. They get grants and subsidies. They platform government goods and services. They platform taxpayer-funded individuals that allow people facilitate interaction thereupon. The President of the United States Twitter, for example, has been already declared a public forum. Trump can't even block people on Twitter at this point, legally speaking. He's blocked from doing so by a federal judge. Why only the President? Why not every member of Congress? Why not your governors? Why not state officials, bureaucrats, and so forth, taxpayer-funded, because that's the ethos behind it? Insofar, therefore, as these companies are banning people for misinfo, for misleading people by disagreeing with whatever the WHO says, I would label that unconstitutional. They're a public platform at this point. They platform government goods and services. They are not essentially entirely capitalistic, free enterprising private corporations. They are in part public in nature. They are public platforms. We already do this with ISPs. We don't allow them to act in a discriminatory manner. We do this. Your water company can't shut off your water because you're a Nazi. Your electrical company can't say, you know, this group of people in this neighborhood, they're commies, we're cutting the power lines. They can't do that. They're not allowed to. They can only sever services on a fiscal basis. Why don't the tech firms get held to the same account? I think that it's about time that we have a discussion over whether we're going to be a free country or whether we're going to allow tech firms based in the United States to consistently censor people on an extra-legal basis, despite, again, platforming government goods, services, and figures. Number 3 would be the right to assembly. This is the most directly impacted. The right to assembly, the right of people to lawfully assemble, is fundamentally violated by these lockdowns. Again, suspending that very temporarily in and of itself may also be unconstitutional, if pragmatic. Now you can't even make the pragmatist's argument against allowing people to assemble. When I see people in crowds waving signs and flags, how many tales do we actually have over the last 2 months of people joining in these protests of these people getting sick and dying? Who goes to protests? Is it 80-year-olds who have a lot of comorbidities, or is it generally people who are young and fit? Especially if they're coming from the Gadsden flag-waving crowd. They're young and fit. The odds of them getting coronavirus and dying from it are less than 1%. Generally speaking, they'll be fine. For kids, it's even lower than that. Kids are the best off of all. I just hope that the second wave isn't a mutant that does Spanish flu mode and kills 10-20% of them. I'm sure the Democrats would be really happy, by the way, if that fucking happened. And then there's the right to privacy. In some cases, we have states like, some New Yorkers may have traveled, and I think in New Jersey they were going door to door searching people's homes, again without a warrant, based on their emergency powers. The fact is that we need a constitutional amendment to prevent anything like this from ever happening again. Because people overreacted completely. There should be a very limited, definite period in which the federal or any state entity can close things down unilaterally. This even extends to business. The whole basis of the U.S. is based on the idea that individuals in voluntary association can make money, can move around, can do what they want, say what they want, and be free. That's the whole fucking point. That's the whole reason the United States exists. Because some people, some colonials, shot at their own government over excessive taxation, attempts to stifle their speech and their creativity, and finally the capstone of why they started shooting was an attempt at gun confiscation, in the most literal sense. That's why the British ended up getting shot at. Of course, it was their own government's troops they were shooting at the time, using military-style weapons, by the way. It was very interesting. But no, the lockdowns are explicitly illegal at this point. I can't wait until people in retrospect acknowledge that. It'll be just like the expansion of government power after 9/11. And years go on, and we realize how bad the spying was and how many stupid wars we entered into. And all these people shamefaced it said, oh, I didn't support it at the time, hee-hee, nervously chuckling because they did. Because they were a bunch of paranoid retards. That's about all. Peace out.